I'm sorry, I've just been dying to do this. Before we start, hang on one second. Saul, was that inappropriate? Yeah, if you're put off by it a little bit, I know. We live in the world of selfies. Some people have their selfie sticks. Everyone I know has a selfie pose. Well, where's Captain Fishbein? She really has the pose you have to see. A colleague of mine tells this story about being in Israel during doing Muslim she's taking pictures of the old city, and she says, "Oh my goodness, I realize I must have missed something because everyone else is taking a picture of," and she turns around, and there's all this rubble back there. So she's taking pictures of the rubble also. She figures she missed something. I better catch up. And she's like, I wonder if this is 3rd century rubble, or maybe this is 1st century rubble. And she's like telling the person next to them, like, I bet you it comes from the Roman times. No, it's the Greek times. And they all look at her like she's strange because no one is taking a picture of the rubble. They're all turned around this way because they're taking selfies of themselves with Jerusalem behind them. And by the way, rabbis of all people sending back like these giant pictures saying, rabbis do Israel in the Gaza war. Rabbis do Israel, and there's bloodshed all over the place. You know, it's interesting. A selfie is actually a contradiction in terms. You think by taking a selfie that you're taking a picture of self, but we're not taking a picture of ourself. We're not taking a picture of our core. We're not taking a picture of our essence. What we're doing is we're taking this superimposed picture of ourselves. We are big, and the world is tiny. Jerusalem, the holy city of Jerusalem, and my big face is in front of it, and the kotel, the wall, is like this big. But I sort of get it. So many of us feel like we have to superimpose ourselves to the world. We want to block it out. We want some of it to go away. Because the world feels so darn frightening these days, doesn't it? Can you imagine Rosh Hashanah this year, what it's like in Florida, or Houston, or Mexico, or if you watched the news last night, no power for 6 months, Puerto Rico, what the holiday must feel like there? We worry about getting into the parking lot and making sure our soup's ready on time. That would be their pleasure this year, wouldn't it? So it feels like there's so much for us to pray about on this Rosh Hashanah. Terrorism punctuates the globe. Racism is all so alive and all so well. The chanting and the goose-stepping of Charlottesville still haunts my soul. The Jews will not replace us. The Jews will not replace us. And so we come here to pray for our world on this Rosh Hashanah. Prospects for Arab-Israeli peace seem bleaker than they have in decades. The Middle East itself, it wobbles on a cake of imminent chaos. And we have this mashugana adolescent sociopath with a happy nuclear trigger finger in North Korea. And he's not. He is. And so we come here to pray for our world on this Rosh Hashanah. Supposedly the economy's doing better. Unemployment levels, their rates are at the lowest that we've seen them in years. But somehow when I talk to you, when I feel the vibe, when I feel the energy, you seem to reflect back to me that you're just waiting for the other financial shoe to drop. And I think that's just it these days. There is this sense for so many of us, on so many levels, that the proverbial other shoe is about to drop. And so what do? We come here on this Rosh Hashanah to pray for our world. Everything feels so tenuous, everything feels so uncertain. I can't tell you how many of you, more than it's have ever since I've been at this congregation, have said you have so much to talk about this year. And it's true. There's so much. And on some level, I think it's important to do what I just did, to have your rabbi, to have your leader get up and at least list it all, because it's happening around us and no one seems just to say it out loud. So I hope me affirming that for you gives us just a little bit of catharsis. But I want to talk about all of it from a different perspective than we're accustomed to, a different way that we've been engaging in. See, what we do is we talk about all this, but I don't hear anyone really talking about anything. We list the issues, but we don't dig down to their core. We watch our favorite cable channels about all of these issues, but then we just get stirred up and angry and parrot back the same to our neighbors. We put them all, and this is my metaphor, we put them all on this carousel of obsession. They go around and around and around, and we talk about them and talk about them and talk about them, and all it does, I don't see anyone feeling better. I just see everyone getting angry and everyone getting scared, and we end up staying stagnant. We end up too often speaking from a place of fear, and so we constrict, we paralyze, and we end up picking up stones and throwing them at each other. Every opinion other than our own is just not wrong, but we make it life-ending. We laugh and we snicker at others, dismissing their existence. And I'll tell you, I fear for us when I think about this dynamic, because we continue each day to isolate more from one another. So I want to suggest that we take a different picture on this Rosh Hashanah. I want to suggest that we switch the perspective completely. Instead of taking the selfie that I just ran around and took, how about this year if we take a different picture? What would happen this year if we take something that a friend, a colleague of mine calls a soulfie? How about that? Not a selfie, but a soulfie. That is when we take a picture of our souls, or at least we take a picture from the perspective of our insides. Then we are not just sharing our fears, but we're also sharing our hopes. Then we're not just sharing what frightens us, but we're also sharing what it is that inspires us. Then we don't just react by angry instinct, but we act instead by thoughtful intention. The world is spinning, and we, our souls, our insides, our kishkas, our wisdom, have something to say about it. My good people, Rosh Hashanah, if we take its message seriously, has always begged us. I don't care what year it is and what's going on in the world, it's always begged us to do one thing, and that is to understand that we're always in a contest between life and death. We always are. A time that implores us to act, impels us to go out there and be a part of the world. You know, my mother, on her gravestone, just wanted one statement. It's a statement that I know a lot of you connect to. It says, in Yiddish and in English, man plans and God, we all know it. Human beings plan and God laughs. But with all due respect to my mother, I wonder if that maxim should be switched around this year. Perhaps actually it's God who plans, and it's we who end up doing too much of the laughing. What I mean by that is, could you ever imagine in your mind that God's actually out there planning for us to live so differently than we actually do? Did you ever think that God is cheering us on, wanting for us to see each other as made in the divine image? Wants to see us fulfill our very potential that I believe was put into us from the moment we were born? But I wonder these days as I look around if we're subverting God's plan, if somehow we're mixing it all up into a cloudy soup of confusion and distrust. Ezekiel, who you should get to know, I always call him the psychedelic prophet, that's for another sermon. Ezekiel preached in his own day about confusion and distrust that he saw in his people. So he asked them, he begged them, and he said to his people, "Can you please fashion for yourselves not a heart of stone, but a heart of flesh? Can you fashion for yourselves not a heart of stone, but a heart of flesh? Not a heart that is instinctively hard, but one that is open to the dire needs around you." It has been quite an environment over this past year. Perhaps I was most acutely awoken and shaken to the complex reality about which I speak this past fall and early winter. To say that there was a change election last November would be an understatement. Some were elated, some were depressed, almost everyone was confused. So after Election Day, I wrote you a letter just to acknowledge the change, to acknowledge the fissure and confusion. And there were also so many nasty societal issues that arose to the election. And so I reminded everyone of our obligation, apart from policy, as a religious community to stand up for certain ethical issues. To that letter, I heard mostly gratitude. Then came inauguration. People were more unsure and more confused. The disconnect between people felt worse than I ever experienced. The Thanksgiving stories were the worst Thanksgiving stories I'd ever heard. The poison on the internet was the worst poison I'd ever seen. So how was a rabbi to preach a sermon on that Shabbat evening? So what I did, I thought it was clever, it was from my heart, I wrote a prayer. I wrote a prayer for the president. I ask you to pray with me that Mr. Trump be successful. If he could be successful, then perhaps we too as a nation could be successful. I wrote it because at the very least, we should always pray for our leaders. That didn't go so well. On the left, I was excoriated for acknowledging that Mr. Trump was the president, even though I actually watched him get sworn in that day. On the right, I was accused of being pedantically apologetic. What's the matter with you, Rabbi? You think he's so ill-equipped that he needs your prayers? I was looking for a way in past the vitriol, but no, that was not to come. But then came the game winner, the first executive order on immigration. As most of you know by now, Lauren and the kids and I went to the airport that night, and we protested what felt like the antithesis of so much of what it means to be Jewish. And yet, my actions were interpreted to be anti-party instead of pro-Jewish ethics. It ended up being one of the most difficult and fruitful weeks of my 20 years in the rabbinate. The reactions were of the surreal. On social media, my family's life was threatened, and I was compared to Osama bin Laden. Here at TBJ, 2 families immediately quit the congregation, while several others threatened to resign, and none of them accepted my offer to talk. And I received one of the more cowardly letters of my career. It stated, "I'm a rabbi who only cares about money. I brainwash our children, and I don't care about all of you who vote on the right." And by the way, I only say cowardly because of how it was signed, of course, anonymously. Always the courage and profile, right? And it was signed anonymously, the TBJ Milburn Livingston Trump supporters. But then, the moving and redemptive part of it all. Many of you opened up some of the deepest dialogue I have had as a rabbi or as a human being. Between emails and calls, I must have spent 30 hours of that week in conversation. And here's some of what happened. And almost every call started this way, or every email. "Hello, Rabbi." I said, "Hi, so-and-so." Before I get to what you're calling about, like I didn't know, I said, "How are you doing? How are your wife? How are the kids? How is your husband? How are the kids?" Oh, thank God, they're all fine, Rabbi. By the way, how are Lauren and your kids? Thank God they're doing well also. 20 decibel drop. Boom. Then, and that was fine, then they went on and they said, "We're worried about a few things." And I said, "Please tell me. We're worried about you making this a partisan pulpit. We're worried about you teaching politics in the religious school. Some of you who are immigrants who have come here in this lifetime told me how proud you are to be American citizens, how it's a privilege to be here, how some of you were vetted for 3 months and 18 months and 2 years, and every single one of those days was worth it. I learned from another of you sitting here today, whose own father was gunned down by a terrorist many years ago, what your outlook is, how it is that you see the world, how it is that you wanted to teach me about how it is that you see the world." And then most moving, a couple of you said, as we were about to get off the phone, "Rabbi, there's one more thing I want to tell you. I don't want to hate." And I would say, "I know so-and-so, I don't want to hate either." He says, "More than that, I don't want my kids to hate." I said, "I don't want our kids to hate either." Let's somehow find a way to talk through this in the deepest ways possible, to the deepest recesses, so somehow we don't have to visit whatever it is we're going through on our children. Let's figure this out so we don't have to be instinctively hateful and instinctively scared. We got off the phone, off the email with promises to reconnect more. The conversations started hot and volatile, but then they became adult conversations. We didn't withdraw from each other. And after all that, by the way, it was Shabbat once again, and it was Devin Janae's bat mitzvah. I only say that because not all of you will get this, but David Janae, the father, is probably the most liberal guy in the congregation. That should get a laugh from anyone who knows who he is. It's obviously the opposite side. And I thought to myself, by the way, I said to Lauren, Laura's going to walk out saying, I cannot believe he mentioned me in front of 3,000 people. And David's going to walk out and say, I'm a rock star. Different ways we deal with this. So how was I supposed to deal with a family who have these really, really, really strong feelings about their politics and are really ethically based, and people I love, we've raised our children together, and make sense of this for the congregation without sort of blowing it all up? Well, on that Shabbat, I'll tell all of you what I told the Janaes and others that evening, and I want you to hear it loud and clear. This is not a partisan pulpit. It's not. We don't teach your children about politics. We teach them something called Torah. This is not a partisan pulpit. However, I have to tell you, I do feel compelled to push the envelope on what I call the moral imperative. The question, of course, is, and Eric Sellinger, you brought this up to me so many times and challenged me in ways to make me think about this, does the moral imperative work without rubbing up against the political? Right? The conversation we have had many times. Does the moral imperative work without rubbing up against the political? And the answer is, of course not. But just because it rubs up against the political, does that mean that we can't find the nimble wherewithal, the sophistication, the intelligence? All of us are such smart, sophisticated people. Can't we understand that there's a multi-layered way to be discerning in our lives? You brought me here now all those years ago. You told me because you wanted me to speak up and speak out. You told me in my interview you wanted me to disturb you when you were feeling too comfortable. Having a heart of flesh means that we don't get up and walk away when one side or the other wins. Do you hear me? We don't get up just because the other side wins. We have to hang in there as long as we can. In Jake's middle school this past year, the day after the election, I'm sure you saw a lot of this in places, the 8th grade gets up and they have a walkout. They're walking out to protest the election in 8th grade. Probably a good way to get some extra lunch outside or something. But they did, and everyone was so excited about our kids exercising their First Amendment rights, and they believe in what they want to say, and they voice it with peace. But we all got together with the principal, many of us, and said, that's great that they did that. But when they got back inside, did you put them around a table and made sure they understood all of the issues? Did they understand why they walked out of the school? Did they understand what it means to have different points of view from different sides of the aisle and what the ethics are that glue that all together? The school, I would say, that I generally love did not respond well to that. They did not bring them back. They just wanted to make sure that all heck didn't break loose. And then, you may have read about this in the newspaper, my friend Warren Spar, who sends me great articles all the time, and I really appreciate it, Warren. You might have read in the Times and the Wall Street Journal that the reform movement and the conservative movement, by way of protest, decided they were not going to get on the High Holy Day call with President Trump this year. So listen, I want to tell you, you might like it or not, I was not on a call with Obama, I was not on a call with Trump. It's just you getting to hear the president's voice. There's 3 questions, they're vetted, and you get no conversation. So I have other important things to do during this time than to listen to either Obama or to Trump, Mr. President, either way. But I have to tell you that I was so dead set against it. I was so upset that our movement, by way of protest and indignant, said, we're not talking to the president because we want to show him how against his values we are. I get it. I was really against certain things that happened in Charlottesville also and how it was handled. And even though there's not a real conversation on the phone, why even make the appearance of not being in dialogue? Why even make the appearance of saying, I'm so angry and I'm so right, I'm not getting on the phone call? And you should have seen the pride with which people wrote on Facebook about how we're so proud of being rabbis in this movement. And I knew in that moment that every single person who thought about things from the other side, I don't mean about race, I mean about politics, all withdrew from those rabbis immediately. And that was it. So I wanted to take what I said a few months ago, was I want to give you an example of what I mean, that there's a moral imperative one side and there's the politics, and how we could actually be sophisticated enough to separate it. Let's take what I hope is an easy one. Let's take hunger. The religious and moral imperative, I hope we could all agree, is that people should not be hungry in this world. Can we buy that? That we don't want to live in a world where people are hungry? I know we buy it because you bring all those thousands of pounds of food. That's the religious imperative. The politics, it's up to you. You want to vote for the person who says, pull up your bootstraps and you get a job? Vote that way. You want to vote for entitlements and you want to make sure that people are just given it? I don't care. That's not my job. My job is for you to understand that the Jewish imperative is to make sure that people who are hungry are sated, and then you go vote the way you want to vote. But the imperative here is not politics, it's about feeding people. Okay, that's an easy one. I'm only going to use the case study of immigration because that's what it was all about, the whole trouble that I got into. We have to have adult conversations, which means we have to say things that we don't like, that is sometimes very difficult. So here's some things I'm going to say that you're not going to like and are very difficult, but I want an adult conversation. Number one, on that issue, Islamic fundamentalists have attempted to or have killed thousands of innocent people in a medieval, disgusting manner. A majority of Muslim countries don't acknowledge the existence of the State of Israel. Finally, and I can list many, Muslims don't do nearly enough to curb radical Muslim behavior. That's part of an adult conversation, and my very dear friend, the imam, who's coming to Jake's bar mitzvah this year, we've had that conversation. It's not easy, but we talk about it. I could go on, but you get my point. I don't like saying these things and all the counterpoints I could offer, but part of the moral imperative from that discussion means that it is a Jewish imperative to keep our country safe, to vet people at the borders, and as long as it takes for us to be safe, we should do so. And, not but, and, the other part of the Jewish ethical imperative and part of the adult conversation is we have to weigh vetting with the Torah's injunction, which states no fewer than 37 times that we cannot oppress the strangers because we were once strangers in a strange land. That means that every single person in the entire world is important. That means that as much as we're going to triple down on vetting, I'm going to say to you as a Jewish community, we have to triple down on our compassion. I don't care what that means and actually what it costs us to spend to be that way. If we're going to vet that way, we're going to be compassionate that way. Triple on security, triple on compassion. Folks, we live in a complex world. It doesn't have easy black and white corners to fold up. My good people, it feels impossible to deal with our hate and to deal with our fear. And I know, because I struggle with my own anger and resentment, I also get scared. But my good people, this is not a contest between who wins. This is a contest between who will be victorious and still have a soul left to go along with that body that we work so vigorously to defend. Can we see ourselves to a balance in between? Can we find human unity without unanimity? Might we fashion ourselves a heart of flesh instead of a heart of stone? This is no longer a plea for civility. I've tried that 3 years in a row. Do you know that I've given pieces of sermons for 3 years in a row on civility? Do you know that you walk out and you hug me and you kiss me and you say, Shana Tova, and Rabbi, you're so right? And then we go out there and we do the same thing again. So this is no longer a courteous request. This is a supplication of the highest order. This is asking you to reach down to the deepest recesses to a place that we call empathy. Just like Abraham that we read about this morning, we too are on trial. We are being tested by our ability to open our hearts. So I implore you on this new year to reach down to your most empathic self, the part that drives connection. Empathy is not about being polite. It is a generous choice that says, although I don't understand exactly what you're feeling, I'm going to understand something in myself that understands that feeling. We achieve this most by stopping the ridiculous blame game Are any of you blamers? Come on, are you? I am. Whenever something goes wrong, there must be someone to blame. But you know what blame is? All it is a discharging of our own discomfort. It is a way to pretend that we're actually in control. The irony is that blame actually has an inverse relationship with accountability. I would say that blame is an enemy of empathy. I would say that pity is an enemy of empathy. I would say that fear is an enemy of empathy. And here we go. I would say that moral outrage is an enemy of empathy. I didn't say moral imperative. I said when we go wild and we start yelling and screaming and indignant and we decide we don't want to be in conversation with people, that's an excuse not to see the other side. That's an excuse not to be empathic. So let's break through it. Let's break through our heart of stone and find a heart of flesh. Let's start with ourselves and be compassionate to ourselves. Let's relate to ourselves kindly with our beautiful flaws. And I say beautiful flaws because guess what, my good people? The only thing that actually bonds all of us together is the fact that we're all imperfect. And when we don't hear each other, we don't see each other, we just grow in our misery. I would say that I have been sadly privileged to see compassion and the greatest empathy displayed at its saddest moments. I have seen it when people rightly have every legitimate reason to give up. And that is, of course, around horrific and terminal diagnosis. Many of you may know my dear friend, a dear friend of many of you sitting here to my left, Rob Frischman. Besides the fact that he's a Miami Dolphins fan, which really bothers me a lot, he has every reason to be angry in this world. A year ago, Yom Kippur, when Saul and I were downstairs talking before Torah study, I asked Saul to put his phone away, and he said, I can't because I need to show you something. Rob just texted us and said that he was diagnosed with stage 4 glioblastoma brain cancer. Rob and his beautiful bride fought valiantly this year, valiantly. Brain surgery, up and around, doing his thing, back to work. And then earlier this summer, there was recurrence. And not a lot of options. So when I called them and I said, Rob and Maria, what do you want to do? Without missing a beat, they say, we want to get married. I said, excuse me? Yeah, we want to get married. We want to make sure, even though we know that everyone has an expiration date, that we're going to live every single day to the fullest of our ability. So they decided to be good to themselves. With all the huge bumps they've had to overcome, huge bumps, they decided they were going to get married. So that happened here just a couple of Sundays ago, 3 Sundays ago, right here on this bima. A lot of smiles, a lot of tears, but the point I actually want to make, besides it being one heck of a party, guys, was that most of us there really didn't want to be happy. We felt too sad. But these guys, the ones who have every reason to be upset, every reason to be angry, said, no, we're going to celebrate the heck of every minute we have in this life, and so are you. And you know what? I see some of you who were with us that night. We lifted up and we celebrated because our sense of empathy, our sense of understanding what their feelings were, way superseded the feelings that any of us had. One of the greatest moments and one of the greatest lessons of my life. You see Rob and Maria, and the two of you guys with your little sister downstairs. All of us have an expiration date. Rob and Maria and their kids simply decided to act upon theirs instead of going away and just letting life happen to them. So how about us? How about us? Is this going to be a year of selfies, or is it going to be a year of selfies? Is this the year that we're going to fashion ourselves a heart of stone, or are we going to fashion a heart of flesh? Is this going to be a year where we act like we did when the solar eclipse came and the hurricanes which unified us because for a moment the world was bigger than any of us? Or a world in which we cause the storms and pretend to be bigger than the cosmos itself? This is our season. This is the season that we're called upon to find our light and to radiate it out to the world. This is the time to make people know that they are not alone, even and especially when they are not like us. our approach to all of this can actually be up to us. It can all be in our hands and all be in our spirits. So as is my tradition, as I come to an end here, I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit different than I have in past years. And I'm going to push you. I'm going to ask you to actually think about the person with whom you want to show the least amount of empathy in the world. I'm not talking about terrorists in the Middle East. I'm talking about maybe someone sitting next to you. Oh, God forbid. Maybe someone who shares a work desk with you. I want you to think about who that person is, and I want you from the bottom of your hearts to think about how it is, and this I'll do some guilt about. I want to figure out how it is in this next 10 days that you're going to go to that person and try to change the frame. From selfie to soulfie. From in your heads to in your hearts. See if you could change the game with that person. Take a moment. I'll even give you permission to write it down on your phones. Who do you need to express empathy to this year? Who it feels impossible to do that with? And just in case you're not awake enough to do that, I don't mean physically, I mean spiritually, or up physically. I'm going to ask someone who happens to be incredibly special in my life, happens to have a bar mitzvah coming up in a few weeks, and he's now going to be our shofar blower. So don't get involved in all that. You got work to do. You got empathy work to do. Let his blowing of the shofar awaken your spirits. And I want to know who it is. You don't have to tell me. I want you to know who it is you're going to practice this sense of empathy with. Tekiah. Shivarim. Shivarim teruah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shivarim. Tekiah. Tekiah. Teruah. Tekiah. So now take that moment. Stay up there, Jake. It's the only place he'll listen to me is here. Now take a moment to do what Rabbi Perlman asked. That's to think about your year and what it is that you yearn for right now. I want you to think about not what you need, but what you yearn for from the very bottom of your hearts. All of us need. All of us deserve. So let go of the part that tells you you don't deserve. And think about what it is that you yearn for. Think about what it is that you're grateful for your life, for your breath, for your connection, for the fact that you could see. You could stand up if you can. You can read and you can write and you can learn and be curious. You're so strong. Just remind yourself what it is that makes you so strong, because you're all so strong. And let the shofar wake us up to gratitude and to yearning. Tekiah, Shvarim teruah, Tekiah, Tekiah, Shvarim, Tekiah, teruah, Tekiah. Now we turn our thoughts to those of us, because we can't leave here without thinking about those of us who have experienced loss this year. There's some people sitting in the sanctuary who have felt deep loss for people who have left this world. So I invite you, if you feel so comfortable, If you've lost someone during this last period of 30 days, to rise and let us acknowledge you for your loss. Our hearts are with you. If you've lost someone during this last 12-month period leading up to this Rosh Hashanah, we ask you to please rise, because our hearts are with you. And we wish we could make your pain better. Your loved ones made our lives richer. Our hearts are with you, and we're here to hold you.